Nobody ever suggested to me that I had PTSD. And I was breaking down. I became suicidally depressed. I was having trouble processing information. I couldn't remember who I was talking to on the phone. I couldn't dial the phone. I couldn't read a paragraph. And I was going to work and popping off my mouth saying things that were hostile and inappropriate and about to get fired. I had no help. Now that I'm talking to you about it, I'm like, not only was it chaotic and broken glass in the morning and strangers walking around the house naked, it's just that everybody would tell you that this was good and everything was fine. I grew up in a commune in Berkeley for much of my early childhood. Oh, that was all peace and love. It's like, no, it was a lot of drugs and alcohol, very low supervision, not always food, crazy sexual stuff going on in the house. For 30 years, I've been working with people who are affected similarly, and it's so wonderful because at least our symptoms are really common, like very similar across people. There's a couple flavors, but more or less, like, we understand each other. There's a hopelessness that some people are ashamed to reveal. And I'm here to tell you as a living example, actually healing is possible. And it can get better if you can let in a little shift about how to do it.
All right, everybody. Today, I'm excited to welcome Anna Runkle, the crappy childhood fairy. Anna has helped hundreds of thousands of people worldwide heal from childhood PTSD using some unique methods that helped her heal from her own trauma. We're going to talk all about childhood PTSD, what doctors get wrong about that topic, and also Anna's new book that should be out by the time you hear this. So, Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We were just talking about whether you are the crappy childhood fairy, or if it's a broader thing. You said you're the OG, so I'm very, very happy to have you on today.
Thank you.
How are you feeling, just in general?
In my life?
Just right now in this moment, yeah.
I'm really excited. I actually really enjoy podcasts. Like, having a conversation and geeking out on trauma is like my idea of a happy morning. So.
Yes.
Got my coffee in my crappy cup, and
perfect. Awesome. Yeah, we're a unique breed. Let's wake up early and talk about trauma. So what do you want to share about your own story in terms of background and how you arrived at being interested in helping people with trauma?
Well, I grew up in a commune in Berkeley for much of my early childhood. And some people who did not grow up around that kind of thing might idealize it and think, oh, that was all peace and love. It's like, no, it was a lot of drugs and alcohol, very low supervision, not always food, crazy sexual stuff going on in the house. And my family, more than half of the members of my family have had serious alcoholism or addiction or both, and most of them have died from it. So for whatever reason, I didn't get that gene, and that wasn't really the thing with me. So I was a good girl, very good girl, and took care of the younger siblings and got good grades and tried to make everything look good on the outside, which I now know is, it's one way of coping. And it's a nice way of coping for a while, because at least you end up with job skills and a way to make a living. So that's good. But by the time I was about 30, the big holes in it were starting to really show up. And I was getting seriously depressed and pushing people away and not coping very well at all. So I had a what I call a trauma storm happen, where a whole bunch of bad things happened at once.
Let me pause you. I want to get to that. I do. Can you help paint a little bit of a picture of what does growing up on a commune mean? People might not be super familiar with that kind of terminology and what you're picturing there.
Well, I'm sure it could be different. And I know people who have grown up in like positive environment communes, but in ours, it was really just communal living. My parents got divorced. My mom was way too far into alcohol and drugs to earn any money herself, and she rented out the rooms. We had kind of a big house in Berkeley, and she rented out the rooms to people. And some of them were quite interesting. Most of them were pretty effed up and, tipping over into the dangerous side of 1969 and 70 and what was going on there at the time. So I had an older brother. He was 7 years older, totally going off the rails, and nobody to help him. And people were like giving him LSD. And when he was 15, lots and lots of it. And he didn't end up surviving.
Oh, okay.
That was common in our neighborhood, as people kind of bought into that whole like, hey, I get to find myself, free love, taking care of kids is a oppression of my spirit. And so it was kind of going around. So we knew which parents in the neighborhood had their act together, and we'd go there for food, and they would quietly help us and teach us basic skills like ice skating and knitting and how to clean a countertop and things that you kind of need to know. And nowadays, people would have called Child Protective Services, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah, for a degree of neglect there.
Neglect, a lot of violence in the house too. People getting so loaded. Yeah, they would just get so loaded and get upset. And the thing about people practicing kind of free love is they get drunk and then they get all mad and smash everything.
Sure, right. So there's kind of a flip side to that coin. Okay, so you were made to feel like the weird one in that situation because you were so like square and concerned about things.
Square. Yeah.
Was mental health even a topic, during your childhood? Was that something that people around you were aware of or talked about?
Well, my brother, because he did like 15 hits of acid when he was 15, obviously lost his mind. It was just obvious. He never really recovered. And so I was aware of crazy. And it's funny, I've acknowledged this to friends. Like I grew up with this terror of going like insane and ending up in an insane asylum. And that was this like idea I had from TV, and I was afraid of it for my brother. And honestly, later on, my mother ended up in and out of mental hospitals because of wet brain. When I was a kid, they didn't tell me what it was. Finally, as an adult, I was able to ask my stepdad, like, what was that? She's like this very urbane Brooklyn lady who's very intellectual, and she comes back and she's made like hand-tooled belts, not like her. What was happening? And he was like, it was wet brain she was getting treated for. And like neighbors came in and helped. It's funny. Our neighbors were very helpful for like getting us antibiotics, getting my mom to the hospital, cutting my sister's fingernails when they were so long and dirty, things like that. So part of my healing has been to acknowledge like help did show up. It did show up, and I'm really grateful to those parents.
Yeah. So you're talking about a long-term, not just one single event that tipped things over, but this sort of environment of instability that you grew up within.
Yeah, and the weird kind of thinking that you develop as a result. Like in my work now, for 30 years, I've been working with people who are affected similarly, and it's so wonderful because at least our symptoms are really common, like very similar across people. There's a couple flavors, but more or less, like we understand each other. And it's just such a relief when you go, so that thing where I'm really controlling sometimes, or I wake up so angry in the morning for no reason, it's like, that's really normal for somebody who grew up the way I did.
This we're jumping all over the place, but I imagine this has probably been really healing for you to do this sort of work because it's the opposite of the gaslighting that you felt back then.
Yeah, I guess it is.
To be able to get that almost like validation in knowing that you're not alone in that. People have had similar experiences.
Yeah, I get a chance to, I'm really like, something I'm observing right now in myself and others is as gaslighting dissipates and you start to have your own experience. I've just become a zealot about like not giving unsolicited advice to friends or anybody. I don't like it when people give it to me. And I got in touch with why do I have such a visceral reaction about that? I made a video parodying the birds and Tippi Hedren getting birds pecking her hair. And it was me getting unsolicited advice. Why do I feel that way? And it's because I think trauma healing has a lot to do with starting to have your own experience and just becoming aware of your own preferences, reactions, longings, and to start clearing out all that other stuff. It's a lot of clearing, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you start realizing that trauma was a factor for you? When did you start to be able to recognize that as a thing?
Well, I'll tell you, I started going to therapy. I think the first time a family member sent me was when I was 14 because I was really depressed. My dad was dying of ALS at the time. And I kind of had a kind of teenage breakdown one summer while visiting him. And they sent me to one therapy appointment. I didn't really go for my own reasons till I was 21. And at that time, Claudia Black's book, about adult children of alcoholics came out. Like that wasn't really a thing before then.
Sure.
And my therapist was very excited about it and got permission to record our sessions because I was such a classic case of an adult child of an alcoholic.
You were such a good girl. You were just, ready to participate.
Yeah. And by the time I was 21, I had like chronic back pain. I was headed into like years of chronic fatigue syndrome. I had a lot of the, headaches, gut problems, I was a typical adult child of an alcoholic. So that's the first time I heard about what it was. But what was advocated back then was that you go confront your parents. Mm-hmm. Good Lord, that didn't go well.
So you made an attempt to?
I did. There was a lot of like abuse that happened to me under their watch. Like they didn't do it, but they were basically oblivious that it was happening and they should have known and prevented it. Like, And so I went and confronted them and I was really angry. I was really emotionally dysregulated. Like I have words for that now. So whenever I would try to talk about what had happened, I would just be like screaming. And, as a mature person now, I'm like, yeah, well, of course they shut down on that because they haven't changed. They feel guilty. They don't know what to do. And they can't really deal with getting criticized right now because they already feel so bad. And anyway, gluck, 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 so that it didn't go well. They threw me out of the house, and they didn't protect me. And that never came up again. Like we never talked about it again.
There's such a interesting parallel there because from my perspective, your therapist also didn't protect you, right? Throwing you to the wolves in that way. And then you were essentially punished for trying to heal.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's why we have to be careful that we have the perfect solution that's cookie cutter for people. And what I've come to realize is that some people who write books or do research or even are therapists, a lot of therapists have experienced this themselves, so they have some reference point. But I think a lot of people are trying to interpret what childhood PTSD is by looking at it from the outside, where it looks like, if I just give you this pamphlet, you're going to change your behavior because you just didn't know, right? But it's not that at all. Like I've always been like pretty intelligent. You'd have to be to survive all of this.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's not that I didn't know, but it was hard to understand why I kept making self-destructive choices over and over again. I couldn't understand it. And it still isn't like a logical thing, but it's a thing. And there's a way you can stop it.
What are these self-destructive behaviors or patterns that you were noticing as you went into adulthood?
In myself, it was... Number one was at a certain point, it wasn't in the beginning, but I got my heart broken a lot as a teenager because I would attach too soon. And it started to turn me kind of sour. And at first I was just like an innocent kid and I would just fall in love and I would get sexually involved. And then I would just get completely destroyed by the inevitable breakup. And that's so normal for people whose parents are not paying attention to them emotionally. It's just totally normal. Such a relief. So I would just be like, what's wrong with me? I must be ugly. I must be fat. There's some memo that people got about how you're supposed to act with your boyfriend, and I didn't get it. And so I think I would imagine, it's hard to remember, but I would imagine I came on very strong and then immediately like rolled out the red carpet, like you own my soul now and right, I own yours, and right? Yeah, and they'd be like, and it comes off as crazy. I wasn't crazy. I was just like emotionally in that state of trying to get the love I needed. And I teach people a lot about this idea of limerence, this obsessive, addictive love that reflects a capacity to see love where there is no love. And of course, like a kid needs to develop that to survive, like to have ego survival is to go, well, of course they love me. They're acting like this, but we have this very special bond, me and my mom, and you have to believe these things. And then if that doesn't get healed later, it turns into a really dysfunctional pattern. So there's a couple of dynamics that affected me and that I just see it again and again, the people who respond to my YouTube channel and they write me letters as if they've never seen the 100 letters I've written about this phenomenon. But with that attachment wound, that insecure attachment, having sex early in a relationship can just activate early attachment. You just get attached really hard at the beginning. And it usually you have that wound because you also have an abandonment wound. And coupled with that, the inclination to just jump right in and give your whole heart and soul to somebody. And then to realize maybe a day or two or a week or two or a year or two later, this is horrible. I need to get out, but you can't because your attachment wound is so vicious. And do you know Pete Walker's term, abandonment melange?
I haven't heard that term, but that makes sense.
Yeah. For people who were literally abandoned, which I was, there's a whole like physiological reaction to anything that smells like abandonment. Like even if I would think I need to leave a relationship back then, it would throw me into it, and it would be like this huge like toxic rush of body chemicals, of panic and dread and grief, and like I'm going to die. I'm going to die even thinking about leaving somebody I don't like.
And of course that's self-perpetuating, right? Because what's going to drive somebody way better than starting to have that kind of reaction?
Yeah. And, in straight relationships, sexual relationships lead to children. And this is where the generational trauma comes, where the, hastily slapped together relationships that turn into parents who can't really be there and can't really hold life steady. And, life is messy like that. And that's a little bit how I had my kids. And I love my kids, and they're great, and their dad loves them, and things have worked out. So I accept that life is messy, but it's a very hard road to live through.
Yeah.
A lot of shame involved, a lot of self-hatred involved.
I hear a lot of what you're describing as you had to be a certain way during childhood. You had to learn almost certain skills to keep you alive that later on don't help you as much.
Yeah. Some do. I think it's made me a really good entrepreneur. And I started my first business when I was 9. I had to.
What was that?
So I was a babysitter. I charged 25 cents an hour per kid, and made some flyers and taped them to telephone poles and started getting clients. And then by the time I was 15, I had like 4 businesses. I was delivering papers. I was stringing jewelry for a jewelry store. I was selling flowers on street corners. I was always just coming up with ways to make money. And I like that about myself. I like my creative spirit. I like my ambition. It's served me well. And then what's been harder for me is the way I kind of respond to stress by over functioning and grinding myself down like a candle with no ends left. And that's been harder on my body. So I'm old enough now, like it just definitely doesn't work for me anymore. And so I pull back again from it. But I really am great. There's a lot that I'm grateful for in my life, not the trauma. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But like one of the things about the commune was there were all these artists and intellectuals living there. And my life is still populated with a lot of artists and intellectuals. Yeah. When I have a party, there's very little alcohol consumed because of my taste in people, I guess. They're just, that's not their thing. So, but not everybody.
But there's still a lot of unique people that when you have a party, I imagine.
Yeah. No, it's a really wonderful part of life. And what I also love about having some healing around my trauma is I'm a nice person. I'm a nice person with boundaries. So I don't have a lot of problem people, and I don't push people away so hard anymore. And that's the real fruit of recovery. I think the top of recovery though gets overlooked. It's becoming your full and real self. It's like just feeling better. I would have settled to feel better.
Sure.
If I could have felt better and had a boyfriend, I would have felt like I had made the top of the mountain. That would have been great. But it's really been so much more. And I've come to believe that like each person has in them something really important to bring to the world. And that's the object of the game, is to liberate that. And then having done that, you can turn around and create conditions and give other people a hand up where they can do it too. Like what a wonderful world where everybody can do that. And it's not utopia. It'll never be perfect.
I was going to say the commune is coming out in you right now.
The commune, yeah. No, I'm very anti-utopian. I think utopia ideas are just a disaster, but it's I don't know. I really think it is. I think it is like the answer.
Yeah.
Is to become our full selves and help other people do it too. Because what that's inclusive of is both a concept of personal freedom and love of other people, and an acceptance that people really do need to be themselves, which is, it's important. And if I think, being themselves if it results in like criminal and harmful behavior. I don't mean that, obviously. Right. I that's not what I'm talking about, but that people, like for me, I found my gifts have to do with telling the story. Mm-hmm. I noticed that because you ask yourself, what do I do? Is there something I do? A mentor asked me this question once. It was life-changing. What is it that you do? I was like, I know I'm supposed to do something more with my life before I was doing Crappy Childhood Fairy. I was sponsoring hundreds of women in 12-step recovery in the program for families of alcoholics. That was very meaningful for me. I said, I love that, but I knew it was something more than that. And so this mentor said, well, what is it that people tell you over and over again that you do that helps them? And I was like, well, it's when I tell my story. And so he suggested I experiment with that. So I had a potluck and said, I'm going to tell my story, whoever wants to come. And people were like packed into my house. And we used to have, parties, my husband and me, and maybe 20 people would come, but this was like 40 people. And I told my story for an hour of how I recovered. And this is still before Crappy Childhood Fairy. This is kind of what led to it. And and I got to the part where the breakthrough was happening, and I paused for a second to take a sip of water, and I looked around, and people were like on the edge of their seat. And the guy who had mentored me on this question was there, and I looked at him, and he was like, this is it. Yep. There it is. Because you can only kind of speculate what it is that you're meant to be doing, but you find out by trying. And so that's when you have less trauma knocking around, and I can get to that with you, like, what is it? What's going on in there? What does that feel like? But it's too much noise. You can't hear that inner voice. You can't follow what you're meant to be doing. It's not available. You still get that longing. It comes in the middle of the night when you were just sleeping, so your mind had a little space, and then you wake up and you're just like, I'm supposed to be doing something more important. Yeah. I feel like my life is passing me by. And so then it begins to come to you. So that's what trauma healing does, is it makes the space where you can recover that, your inner voice, your inner guidance about who am I? And that's where the happiness really gets going. Like the real happiness is just like, I don't know, it was a shitty day, but I did something that I feel good about, and I helped people, and I did my best, so I can go to bed happy and fall asleep and sleep through the night.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's totally valid. In my psychologist brain, I'm seeing Maslow's hierarchy, that triangle hierarchy of needs. And, you need to take care of that bottom stuff when you need to, right? You need food, shelter, you need those basic things. But, chasing comfort is fleeting. Finding greater purpose or this happiness that you're describing is more sustainable. That does make more enduring change.
Yeah. So I always joke around. I was like, if I could just have a boyfriend, it's like, oh, I've had so many. If I could just get married, oh, I've had 2 marriages.
Yeah. So clearly that wasn't the only thing.
I got more than I asked for, more beyond my wildest dreams.
Right. You should be rich in those things. Yeah.
I like being married, though. I've been with my husband for about 16 years and married for 11. And it really suits me to have that nice stability. And I have 2 kids from my first marriage, and I just love my kids. I love having kids. I wish I had my act together to have just dozens of them. I love kids.
I stopped with 2. I was like, that's I'm good. Yeah. Let me ask, kind of pull things back on track a little bit. So you make a distinction between just general PTSD and childhood PTSD. Are you using that interchangeably with like complex PTSD, what we might call that?
Sort of. I always have to explain that. It drives people nuts.
Just because the acronym's the same, right?
Complex PTSD is the kind of PTSD that comes from chronic ongoing exposure to stress. There, I've said it, everybody. I do understand. But I call it childhood PTSD because CPTSD is a clinical term, and most people don't know what we're talking about. So, and complex PTSD usually comes from childhood, as I understand it. And what I've observed is a lot of times the childhood trauma is there, and part of it is latent, like a herpes virus. And a new thing happens that sort of, sets off some adult onset trauma, like I got attacked on the street. I got beaten unconscious on the street. That's when my childhood trauma got out of the genie bottle and I couldn't get it back in.
You're saying you actually did in your life?
I did, yeah.
Shit. Okay.
Yeah, when I was 30, that was sort of the precipitating event that I just couldn't hold it together anymore.
That kind of
I was
knocked some
doing
stuff
okay.
loose.
Yeah, there's a such thing as healthy compartmentalization.
Sure.
And I think that I've just noticed that's a pattern for a lot of people, like people who serve in the military. Many of them do it quite happily and successfully. But in a lot of cases, I think it's kids who had trauma go in and then, God forbid, they end up in combat, more trauma. I think that's like a toxic soup, is to have that underlying childhood trauma and that sort of having, I have visuals for everything, but we know that early trauma damages, it's like an injury to the nervous system. And so I picture it sometimes like all these little channels that are like Swiss cheese, like it's going to hold together for so long, but not forever. And if something kind of knocks into it, like a combat experience, boom, the structure falls apart. And I think that's really common. When I had that happen to me, when I was attacked and my mother died, I was like, I saw my mother for the last time that same week.
Wow.
And I had already been like really depressed about the loss of a relationship. It was, I call these trauma storms.
Yeah.
Life brings them sometimes all at once, just and breaks you down. And, you hope you can get through it. If you do, that whole thing, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What a lie.
Yeah.
I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's all kinds of people where it didn't make them stronger.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That sort of unfounded optimism is not helpful.
Spiritual bypassing. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was always aware that I was, my brother died of all of this.
Yeah.
My mother died of it. My dad died of ALS, but he had a really hard and traumatic life. So he didn't even make it to 50. And,
wow.
And, my family doesn't live long. That's the thing. And so it was really in the back of my mind that I was in danger. But I got attacked on the street, and it was this weird, I was unconscious for a period of time, and I just have this like certain knowledge that I had some sort of conversation with God there and just said, yeah, I guess now that I think about it, I really do want to live. I really do want to live. Help me get out of this. And I came to enough and screamed and made the attack stop, because it was like 4 guys kicking me in the head and face as hard as they could. Broke my jaw and my teeth. But I had PTSD so bad after that. Now, this was 1994. And believe it or not, nobody ever suggested to me that I had PTSD. And I was breaking down. I became suicidally depressed, which is normal after a trauma.
Yeah.
And I was having trouble processing information. I couldn't remember who I was talking to on the phone. I couldn't dial the phone. I couldn't read a paragraph. And I was going to work and popping off my mouth saying things that were hostile and inappropriate and about to get fired. And I had no help. I was going to therapy 3 times a week. I was going to the doctor. The doctor was doing a brain scan going, looks good, so no bleeding here.
Right.
And the therapist that back at that time, it just wasn't understood. So she was saying, let's go through what happened again. She thought repetition to the memory of getting attacked was what I needed to neutralize it. It didn't neutralize. It was just like triggering a tsunami of a lot of stuff that was kind of stored up in me. And I would sit out in the car and cry and shake.
Can I ask you something about that?
And feel ashamed and think I better hide from her how effed up I am, or she's going to get me locked up 5150'd.
Right.
I don't want that to happen.
Do you remember with that therapist, did she teach you how to regulate anything?
There was no word regulation. That just wasn't a thing.
So she dove straight into it without even giving you a tool to handle what was coming up.
Yeah. We think about archetypes and dreams and, just all this stuff that was totally irrelevant. And she also enabled me. She was a really good person and a really good therapist, and she was a professor at an important institution. So it's not that she was stupid or bad. And she had been through a lot of trauma herself, and not unlike mine. But, the information was wrong back then.
Sure.
Yeah, it was just wrong back then. So this is like revolutionary that the understanding of what complex PTSD is and the concept of dysregulation, not just emotional, which is the kind other people see, but neurological, that makes your hands clumsy, that makes you drop things and trip on things and forget who you're talking to and, kind of wake up. Like I live in Oakland. I drive to San Francisco sometimes, and there was many a time I'd end up in San Francisco and go did I take the bridge? Because I don't
How did
remember
I get
that,
here?
And it's like a 10-minute drive in the best of conditions to drive on the bridge. And I would just kind of like check out. And it's part of that is okay. That's part of how we rest our brains. But for me, this was crucial information about how to change the self-destructive behaviors. Under stress, a kid who has been through all this hard stuff will have a propensity to have this glitch happen neurologically, where the left front cortex, where reasoning is supposed to be happening, just kind of goes, the electrical activity goes down when you look at it with equipment. The right front cortex of emotions is lighting up, and that's exactly what it feels like. It's an emotional dysregulation, but it's also it's not emotion is like it's the icing on the cake, and everybody's like, oh, it's a chocolate cake, but no, inside it's a different color. It's your whole nervous system's going into a glitch there, and that's what's hard. And so I ended up with 2 autoimmune diseases, which is common and normal, and it's an elevated risk. And I had the chronic fatigue. Probably was a third. That was undiagnosable precisely. But I had Graves' disease and I have vitiligo. And luckily, it's of no consequence. So I have no vanity about it. That's one nice thing about getting older. It's like, meh. I have no skin color on my face like Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So if I want to, I can put on makeup. So I basically that's fine.
Blank slate.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was younger, I cared about these things though. Spots on my feet like a giraffe. And I cared about these things. But but now I really care about not getting a nervous, like my dad died of ALS.
Right. Which is terrifying.
And my mom died of cancer complicated by alcoholism and esophageal bleeding. So I'm not going to die of alcoholism, but I did used to smoke heavily. And everybody's at risk for cancer. So I really think of getting re-regulated, of bringing peace to your nervous system as beneficial to every aspect of being alive. It's a good thing. It allows you to connect with people. It allows your body to recover. And this is like a long branch story, but I had serious health problems. I had a medical accident happen during childbirth and 14 major surgeries to try to fix it that didn't work. And I had a lot of serious problems. And when this all happened while I had stopped using my techniques to re-regulate, which I didn't have the word re-regulation. I knew they made me feel better. That's what I used to do, but I had quit. And then all of this surgery happened and they kept going, we don't understand why you're always in the 1% of people who, the surgery doesn't work. And it was like again and again. And when I got back into my re-regulation practices, I wasn't expecting it to do this, but I did heal, and all of the workarounds and appliances and bizarre things they had to do to my body to make it work could all be removed and restored back to normal. And I asked the doctor, does this happen a lot? She goes, well, I've seen miracles, but not this one. And so it wasn't magic. It was positive. It was positive in the most magical way. But probably what happened was my body was somaticizing so much stress, I couldn't heal tissue. They were knitting muscles together and they couldn't hold. They would come apart. And when I had less stress running around my nervous system, it could do that. I could have blood flow and white blood cells and fight infection and, have everything work as it's designed to work.
Can you talk a bit about, what are the techniques or focuses that you have for regulating your nervous system? How does that play into trauma?
I discovered this by accident. So it was 30 years ago, and it was when I was at rock bottom with my PTSD after that assault and all the therapy and trying to hide from my therapist how close to dying I was. And I happened to confide there. I was in this theater group, and this new girl came in, and she was really rough, and she used to live on the streets, and I was sort of intrigued by that. And she was very openly and proudly sober from alcohol. Now, alcohol wasn't my thing, but the light that emanates from a sober person can be quite stunning and attractive when you're in dire need of help. And that's kind of what happened to me. I was just like, she was just like the sun had come up in my world. Like, what is going on with her? And it was these weird mixed feelings because she was so coarse and, tattoos. And she talked about God all the time. And at that time in my life, I found that very uncomfortable. And soon I had an experience like hers where I was like, thank God,
Sure.
and so I was simultaneously judging her, but like hanging around. And I gave her a ride one night, and my instinct, I guess, prompted me to tell her. I said, I've made a plan. I'm going to kill myself. And when I think about it now, I'm like, why did I tell her that? But I don't know. Good things happen sometimes. She was the right person to tell. She was very casual about it. She didn't make me feel scared or ashamed, which is why I wouldn't tell my therapist.
Right.
She didn't. Yeah. And she said, oh, gosh, I know that feeling. You want to come in? You want to see what I do? So I came in, and she ended up showing me. We talked for a long time. And, I wish I had had a GoPro, because it's just been so important to my history. And then what I've been able to bring to like a million other people is like, what happened that night? What did she do? She's still my friend. We still hang out. She still helps me sometimes. And her name's Rachel. And she showed me this technique that somebody in AA had showed her. Not everybody in AA does it, but they called it the daily steps. She goes, this is the daily steps. And you write your fears and resentments on paper, and you ask for them to be removed. Now, I want to caveat this right now, because sometimes when I say this in a casual format such as this, where I'm not focused on teaching a person exactly how to do it, there's an exact way to do it that's very important. A lot of times people hear, oh, you make a list of everything you're pissed off about. And if you just do that, it'll just get you more pissed off. It doesn't do the thing. It doesn't give relief. And so it's a really specific technique, with a mental preparation and an intent.
The method behind it.
Yeah, to release and have this removed according to belief system. Are you releasing it from your higher self? Are you asking a higher power to take it from you? So at that night, she showed me how to do it, and it sounded stupid and overly simple, and for hicks, I just didn't get, She's like, well, and we were laughing. I recorded on the audiobook version of my book, Regulated. I have a discussion with her where we're sort of laughing our asses off, but we're also talking about the strange mix of desperation and arrogance that I, and I guess many other people who are hitting bottom, come to help with. It's just like, I need help, but don't you tell me what to do.
Right. Right. No, that's
I already know everything.
Clearly. It's all
Obviously,
worked out.
I've got it all together. What do you mean? So it's funny now. I'm grateful for laughs. Laughing about stuff is like the highest form of accomplishment.
Yeah.
But so we laugh now. But so she showed me how to do this, and she said, so if you want, go home. So I had a plan for the next day to do myself in, but instead I went home about 5 a.m, and it was freezing cold. It was like February, and I wrote, and I went to bed, and I woke up midday, and I just felt better. I felt relieved. And that feeling of relief is like the most precious nectar of the gods there ever was, just to have emotional relief. I never had that. I was always questing for that. I never had relief, and I was just relieved. And just once I was relieved, then more is possible. So she had told me I could call and read to her what I wrote. So I did that, and she gave me some, at first, very gentle feedback. And later, over the years, she would get very tough love with me about certain things. One of them, for example, see, therapists can't say this to you. I said, I was reading her what I wrote, and I said, I fear that nobody wants to hear how sad I am. I'm so sad. And I was sad. My whole family had died that year. It was like, I was really sad. And I was like, I fear nobody cares and nobody wants to hear about it. And she said, that's right, Anna. People are very bored when other people tell them how sad they are. And they're bored with you telling it. It's all you ever talk about. And I was like, oh, the outrage. And I was used to, I've been going to therapy for years where I always got away with anything at all that I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
And she just would validate me, but not at first. She was no therapist. She was much younger than me. She was in her early 20s.
Sure. She would hear you out and challenge you.
Yeah, she would just say, you're full of shit about this. Or I just also, when I would date a guy, I just would, it's so easy to see now, but I had no idea then. All my thing about like, you owe me to care about my feelings and make me feel better when I feel bad. And most people are good-willed and they will try, but they can't because the problem isn't anything they caused. And it's not even happening right now. It's like being generated by your history. And you're projecting it on everything. Nobody loves me, nobody respects me. Well, what can a person do about that? And so that was another level of relief, is when she got through to me, like, people can't do that for you. They didn't cause it. And if they did, get rid of them, stop hanging out with them. But, people can't fix you with that. That's an inside job, as they say in 12-step recovery. And so this technique is a way where you can just day by day, twice a day, sit down, at least twice a day, maybe more during tough times. And you write all those thoughts and feelings that are coming through you, fear I'm no good, and fear I'm just going to die anyway. Fear this is cancer in my breast. Fear, fear so-and-so doesn't like me. Fear they're cheating. Fear the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. And then the resentment. So instead of, when I was in therapy, we would talk about I was very resentful, which is human. And we would talk about it, and talking about it would seem to kind of amplify it for me. Writing about it, and now we know there's a scientific basis. Writing about your feelings uses a different pathway. And for some people with trauma, it can be much less activating,
right, more approachable,
of adrenaline and stuff, to write about it and then even read what you wrote rather than talk about it, which requires a certain kind of memory recall that can set the thing off. Dysregulation. So she would let me write. Well, I wouldn't write to her. I would just write this. I do it. I did it today. I write every day, just the stuff that's bothering me. And rather than going for the significant stuff, you just go for just like what's on the surface, what's bothering you. And it's usually a bunch of old things that are always there, about like body image, I have too much to do. And then, annoyance at the people closest to me, resent them. And then, like, what are we going to have for dinner?
Yeah.
It can be anything. It just can be anything, but the top layer comes off and you don't have to ever dig. So have you encountered the work of James Pennebaker?
I'm horrible with people always said, have you heard of this person? Do you know this person? Do you know this work? And I'm like, I don't know, probably.
Because you create a lot of content, so
yeah.
It's like, when would you do that? Me too. But he did a lot of work. He did a sort of a lifetime of work at the University of Texas, Austin. And I got to know him. I've got a video coming out. I interviewed him and he's going to be on my thing next week. But he created a thing called expressive writing, where he just sort of noted, just casually, he was researching other things and he was like, people, when they write about things, it makes them feel better. I wonder what's up with that. And so he did a lot of peer-reviewed studies, and then other people have done peer-reviewed studies. I was going to say, I think he's a researcher. I think I've come across his research before. Yeah. And I still think his work Huberman did an episode on him, but his work needs to be brought to light, because anything that we can do that's natural, that people, that's not chemical, it's not pharmaceutical, it doesn't require money, it doesn't require any special equipment, that people can manage themselves, that can help improve symptoms, is a good thing. And so this is one of those things. But he taught people to go ahead and write their very worst experience that had ever happened. You write for 15 minutes to 30 minutes a day for 4 days. And that, like, right away I was like, ooh, for my people, for trauma people, that's too much. You wouldn't really want to do a deep dive like that. That would be very hard. So we do it on the surface, and we do it every day forever. And then we meditate afterwards. So that it's a twin technique: writing, then meditation.
What kind of meditation?
And people can meditate any way they want. It was suggested to me. I learned transcendental meditation, which is particularly nice for this because it's not very demanding and easy to stick with for a person like me who doesn't stick with things so easily. And then that's what does it's sometimes it feels really good. Sometimes it feels like nothing. Sometimes it feels like a nuisance. But over time, you get your brain back. So when I first started, it was about 2 weeks in, all of a sudden my brain came back and I could focus, and I was sad, but I didn't have that terrible grinding depression. Not scary sad, just appropriately sad. And I started to have hope. It's a whole different thing. And then decades of solving life problems and, self-defeating patterns and things. That's like something a person has to learn. But you can learn. You can finally actually like pay attention and learn and listen and try things and notice how it went when you're re-regulated. So everything can get better.
When you were early on in doing that type of writing and meditation, did you think it was working at first, or did you try to talk yourself out of it? Were you thinking like, what is this doing for me?
It was up and down, really. It's funny because of that arrogance, I guess. Yeah. I always said it was like becoming a vampire. So when I first learned it, it like saved my life. It was the most radical change that ever happened in my entire life. That and having my first kid, like just so huge. And I remember driving home from work, maybe about 3 months in, and going, any day now, the other shoe's going to drop. It always does. You fall in love, or you find some new thing, or you start running, and then you're like, this is it. This is the thing that's going to fix me. And then, the creepy disappointment comes in. Oh, it's a cult, or, they just want my money.
Right, it's MLM.
Oh, he's on drugs. Or, yeah. I've had all the disappointments in the deck. And the disappointment just never came. But I would get this feeling like it is like being a vampire in the Anne Rice way, where once you've had it, you can't really stop. You can do whatever you want. And I did stop. I stopped for 2 years once, and I just needed that experience because I felt constricted by needing to do something every day, and the way it made me different than everybody. And I was just resentful at Rachel and just like, and who the hell is she anyway? And look at her life. She's just as messed up as me. And blah, blah. I just needed to assert myself, I guess, and see. And I think that's an important part of it, is everybody has to come to their recovery like themselves. You cannot be coerced into it. And sometimes there's only one way to find out what it does for you. And really, for me, because teaching this and getting this book out now, I don't think I'm being arrogant to say this is changing the lives of millions of people to have this simple tool that they didn't have before. And I know it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a hell of a lot of people. It's very helpful. And about 15% of my audience are clinical professionals, therapists, doctors, ER techs, people who work in these fields who need it themselves. And then they share it with their patients and clients. So this is something really important. And I wouldn't have been able to understand it if I hadn't quit for 2 years and had experienced myself falling apart in the same way, but worse. And then coming back to it and feeling what that was like too. Like I needed to learn by trial and error. And I love that about how I was able to learn this is I always had freedom to figure it out for myself, and nobody told me what I had to believe. And in fact, Rachel would say, don't believe anything, just have your experience and see what you think.
Yeah.
And I think that was good advice for me.
Yeah. So you arrived at this stuff in a very genuine way because you've tried many, many things, and this is what helped.
Yeah. And people ask me, I lead these calls every week, teaching people who want to ask questions about it. And I'll probably get asked every time. Somebody will say, I can't do it consistently. And how should I get more self-discipline around it? I'm like, oh, don't do self-discipline around it. Don't do that. Give it a try. And if it feels better, you'll probably want to do it again. And if this is your method, it'll let you know. You'll just kind of crave it. But sometimes pain is the thing that makes you get more serious about it, but not like hitting yourself over the head.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I can't go this whole interview and not ask where the name came from. Because I haven't picked up on that yet.
Well, so before I did this, I had a video production company, and I used to make medical education. And I did a lot of stuff for Kaiser. And then I also did a lot of marketing stuff for like Zoom, companies like Zoom. And it was really wonderful work. I loved it. I was proud of my work, and I loved my clients. But it had programmed me. I was kind of working in public health and community health for like 30 years. And I had created a lot of content and stuff. So I was really like programmed with writing in this very, soft, not assertive way.
Sure.
Like sometimes we might feel like kind of, sort of.
Individuals
you can never really
that have
say
this
stuff.
type of experience sometimes find that.
Yeah. So when I went and took the seminar, and said, I'm going to write a book about what I've learned to do here. I'm going to do it. This was about 8 years ago, and I took a seminar with a guy named Brendan Burchard. It was fantastic. I learned how you actually do this for money online, and that was a really important like turning point. And so I was like, okay, it'll be a book for me. And I went, and I had teenage kids at the time, and my husband's like, go ahead. And I went away for a month, and I was going to like write a book in a month. It didn't happen. Just heads up. There was a lot more to learn and do. But I started my blog, and it was originally called Your Healing Year. And I stuck that on Facebook, and literally nobody looked at it. Nobody looked at it.
Be the real you.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of like a Kotex box blurb or something.
Right. Right.
I was like, no. So I was like, that doesn't work. And so then I ended up drawing a cartoon. There was this guy in my past who was like probably the worst guy ever of my life. And he just discarded me. He love bombed me and discarded me. And my friend went to go, why aren't you calling Anna? And he said, she thinks she's special to me. She's 1 in 30 to me. And I wanted to put that story in the book, in the blog post, but when I wrote it, it was just so like simpering and like, like, why am I even talking about this guy? So I drew a cartoon of a pig saying it. And then that just made me laugh. And I just realized, like, if I'm not laughing my ass off about this stuff, I can't really handle focusing on it this long, you know? So it's got to be sincere and funny. So there is like it's, you know, I did used to be a comedian, but I'm always emphasizing I'm not healing with humor. That's not what this is. These are practical techniques with a scientific basis and a lot of experience. But the levity that we have together makes it joyous, and that you have that common understanding. So the next title that came to me, and a lot of people are saying, come on, you got to do something with this name. And I'm tempted to do a book, but it was called The Feral Girl's Guide. And the emblem was a wolf wearing a dress with a purse trying to act normal at a party. And that cracked me up. And then, but a lot of people, I shared it with friends, and maybe 8 people looked at it, and they said they didn't like being called feral. And I'm like, well, obviously you were never feral. Like I am. But so then I just kept writing blog posts for the Feral Girl's Guide. And one day I came out, and my kids, they were teenage boys, and I came out and I go, you guys, crappy childhood fairy. And it came to me as a memory. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Fractured Fairy Tales. It was this cartoon. It was already like way old and syndicated when I was a little kid in the late 60s. And it was there was this fairy, and she was sort of like a Queen's cleaning lady fairy. And she probably, like, did she have a cigarette dangling from her lips? If she didn't, that was implied, you know? And she came in and she was like, ugh. Okay. And then she'd take her little wand to go, ding, there. Yeah. Everything's fine now. And that was kind of the avatar that I was feeling. And so I called it Crappy Childhood Fairy. My kids, they deny it now, but they were like, no, Mom, you cannot make YouTube videos. Moms can't do that. You can't call it that. Like, they would tell their friends. Like, what does your mom do for a living? Oh, she's the Crappy Childhood Fairy. So they're okay with it now. Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving me the story. I think that everybody would have been just like curious and probably annoyed that I didn't ask you. So
people ask me that.
Yeah.
Occasionally people are like, Miss Runkle, you should not do that. It makes people not take you seriously. And I'm like, well, bullshit. Perfect, because I'm not a therapist or a doctor, and I want to sort of like have that vibe. Like, you know, I'm somebody who's gone through it too, and I know what to do. You want to see? Yeah. And that's what we're doing.
Tell me a bit about the book, about that project, and what are people going to get out of that?
This was so great. So I have a bunch of online courses, and so I had a chance to really, teach through YouTube, which YouTube is like a sea anemone of information. You're like a little idea here, a little idea there. Right. And then I had the courses where I really worked hard to help people get from point A to point B to really make progress that they could feel and value. And in the book, it was yet a new way of sharing something with people. I knew that, this book is being sold all over the world, and that people, Sometimes people have joined my Zoom calls, like girls in Pakistan hiding in their basement so their dad doesn't know that they're getting help for trauma. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I needed a book that if you needed to, you could get everything you needed. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, like you have the message. I have another book coming out next year about a more specific aspect of trauma, about the isolation, which is a chapter in here. But the book, it covers the basic trajectory of my own process of healing, which is, what is this thing? First, what happened to me? What is this thing, complex PTSD? What does it do to people? It's pretty new information to most people. Mm-hmm. And then, why is it that what I've tried before didn't work, and what does? And so I started introducing the role of neurological dysregulation, which is totally crucial. Mm. If that's not part of the mix, a lot of people can't benefit from any other therapeutic thing they try. And a lot of other things they can't do either, like be close to somebody or hold down a job. There's so many things that don't work when you're dysregulated. So I teach a lot about the idea of dysregulation. What is neurological dysregulation? What's a trigger? In my book, a trigger is something that sets off dysregulation. Like, it could be getting criticized. It could be just waking up. It could be somebody almost running over you in the crosswalk. Uh-huh. Something triggers dysregulation and suddenly you can't really use your hands. Your handwriting has changed. You feel discombobulated. So I teach about what it is, and there's a lot of checklists and journal prompts and things where you can go through and learn, apply it to your own life. I focus very little on what happened to you. I just acknowledge up front, this is important, and there's a time and a place where you're going to need to talk about it. Most people have talked about it. Uh-huh. Now it's time to start changing current circumstances. And that was very hard for me to access earlier in my healing attempts. So once it's about me, now I can start working on the actual symptoms. And so that's dysregulation. And these are the three-legged stool, mm-hmm. as I see it. Dysregulation, disconnection from people. There's this almost universal symptom of feeling like you don't really belong with people, no matter what it is, a couple, a group, a classroom, the human race. It feels like being outside of it. I often think that Genesis story of Adam and Eve getting cast out of Eden is the core story of the trauma experience. You're just cast out. You cannot get back in. You're not part of it. And it's in there. It's in the collective conscience. And that's what abandonment melange feels like too, is you're cast out. You cannot be part of things again. You don't qualify. And then there's the social learning. My parents, because of what was going on at home, their social skills weren't totally tip top. Yeah. They couldn't teach me stuff. And when I was having interpersonal struggles, they weren't there helping me figure out how you handle that. I'm there with my kids. I'm like, okay, I think you owe this person an apology. Do you want me to help you phrase that? All right, let's go through this. This is what I would say. Mm-hmm. See if you want to say this. And so, we need to be shown how to interact with this. Or when you get invited to a party that you don't want to go to, what do you say? Or, or you like somebody and you don't know whether you should tell them you like them. Life is just full of these dilemmas where somebody has to teach you how to gracefully handle that. And so the sense of isolation is multi-level. So I teach about that, and I'll be writing a whole book about it. That's a lot of what my content is about, and people resonate very strongly with. And then the third leg of the stool is the self-defeating behaviors. Mm. And that's everything from addictions to all kinds of things.
Relationship stuff.
The attraction to troubled people, unavailable and troubled people. The attraction to unavailable partners is a big one for a lot of people. Black and white thinking, the sort of irresistible draw to authoritarian or abusive people. And cults sort of fall into that, where you're told what to believe and what you're allowed to say and what you can't say, or you get kicked out. Traumatized people are super susceptible to that. Sure. Yeah. And money problems, under-earning, overspending, debting, abusive sexuality. That's a big one for a lot of people, where, obviously it has a healthy place in a life and it turns into something else. And then a lack of self-care, not going to the doctor. People like to have an easy quiz. Here's your easy quiz. Are you taking care of yourself? Open your underwear drawer. Would you want anybody to know what's in there?
That is the CPTSD test.
That's the test. Are you taking care of yourself? And people laugh and laugh. But for a lot of people, it's a litmus test. It's sure. It's part of isolation. Nobody's ever going to see my underwear.
Yeah.
But they're ragged, they're unsuitable, and clothes that don't fit, and clothes that you hate. And of course, poverty. Poverty is a huge part of having trauma. And so there's not money, but I'm often encouraging people like, okay, of the clothes you have access to, what are the colors that you love the best? What makes you feel pretty? Wear that today, even though it's only Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
is to go ahead and treat yourself as a beautiful person.
Right. With the dignity that you want to learn that you deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm kind of I go back to ancient principles pretty strong. There's a lot of stuff out there like you have to love yourself before you can love somebody else. And that's not been my experience. I loved other people a great deal before I loved myself. And loving myself has been quite a project that's come to me through many avenues, through esteemable acts, really, that I could never have done if I hadn't learned to overcome dysregulation. So I started being able to do things I felt good about, and that made me feel good about me.
So the structure of the book sounds like it's very, there's interactive. You said there's prompts, there's exercises, things like that, as well as kind of teaching these fundamental concepts you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I invite people at the beginning of the book to get like a really cruddy pad of paper, such as this one. And then if they want to have a nice journal that's for keeping, and those are two different things. When we write the fears and resentments, they're destroyed immediately.
Right.
You never read them again. Though if you're trying to hold on to them and make sense of them, you're not releasing them. You're trying to grab them by the handlebars, which it's not going to give you that relief. And really, everybody's smart enough that whatever you could have analyzed and figured out about this intentionally, you would have by now. A lot of our understanding is going to come to us through more of a relaxing of the whole thing. And changing the behavior starts to create a space to see things in a new way. So that's going to come. The journal is for putting down what you're noticing as you go through the exercises. And I keep setting up exercises like how to cool a conflict with somebody before it gets too heated. Nice. How to apologize if it did get out of hand. I teach people things like that.
I think that you including these kind of very specific types of exercises, but that will be broadly applicable to people that have been through similar things. That's like a way of demonstrating that you get it, right? Because the things that are kind of going to come up for people who have been through this. Yeah,
I would say so.
Right. You think of resolving a conflict. That doesn't necessarily sound like your typical PTSD skill, but you're saying that it's something that it's a common experience for people who've been through the kind of things that you have.
Yeah. 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 It's been, the nicest thing about having an audience is that I get so much feedback from people when I describe my experience. They go, I have that too. And I'm like, you're kidding me. You do too. So we're all having that experience together, including me. I really thought I was the only person who was a freak like this.
Trauma bonding in the good way.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. In a good way. And then there's the people who really take to my material are ready. They're open to looking at things in a new way. And there's always going to be this cohort of people, and they come at night on YouTube, and they're like, how dare you say that healing is possible? This happened and I'm doomed and I'm stuck like this. And I don't argue with them. I'm sure you get that too in all your work. Some people, this is just where they're at right now. Yeah. And I'm not here to convince anybody. And there's enough people who come to it and give it a try. But there's a lot of deprogramming that has to happen for people to become open to the idea that it can be simpler than they think. And they don't have to cobble together 1,000 different techniques, to come up with the perfect cocktail.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a factor of being a human where you want to justify your pain. If you find that there's a solution to it, or there's a thing that could have been done that would have really helped, then what does that mean for all the pain that you suffered up until that point, right? And it implies something about you. So it's normal to be defensive about that, I think.
Yeah, it is. And then also, when you do heal, and I think everybody notices this, I'm sure you have, when you start to get better and change for the better, you lose some friends. There are people who you had a silent agreement with. It was like, we're going to be fucked up together, right? Forever. And you broke the deal, and now you think you're better than them.
You're so good now. Yeah.
You're so good now. Look at you lording it over me. And you're just standing there. And I come to see this as, it's that light that I saw in Rachel, where she was in that like sobriety glow, and not everybody has eyes for it, but I could see it because I really needed it. And I saw it and I was threatened by it too. I felt judged by it a little bit. I wanted it, but I felt judged by it. So when people tear me down, I often think, well, it's possible they're actually just admiring the glow. I don't know. Not that I'm not like standing there perfect every day. That's for darn sure. But I know what to do about life's problems. I know what to do. Yeah.
Remind me what the book's called.
It's called Re-Regulated. Set your life free from childhood PTSD and the trauma-driven behaviors that keep you stuck.
Nice subtitle there. Yeah. I think it's a really awesome book. And I think that it would be a lot of people's great first steps, even if they do end up needing, professional therapy for trauma. This is a great precursor to that, because that will help them be able to recognize the stuff they might need to talk about in therapy and better deal with it rather than just being thrown in the deep end.
It may be. I think people do it in all kinds of orders. And so some people, they've done therapy and now they need something new, or they do this and they realize they need therapy. A lot of people, their therapists prescribe this technique to their clients, or ask them to watch videos of mine before the next session about some aspect of trauma, which honors me. And I'll brag about this. The Royal College of Psychiatry has just adopted some of my content to use for teaching trauma-informed care to all the psychiatrists getting licensed in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And that's some validation that feels really good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this content that you made is born out of not finding success with those kind of traditional models.
Yeah.
So to have it kind of full circle, try to be integrated into them, you made it.
Yeah. Together we're evolving quite rapidly. I think. I hope.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Before we start wrapping up, is there anything that you want to give as a personal message to those out there that might be in a position like yours?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just know how hopeless a lot of people are. And they write to me. I get hundreds of letters every month from people. And there's a hopelessness that some people are ashamed to reveal. And I'm here to tell you, as a living example, actually healing is possible. And it can get better if you can let in a little shift about how to do it. And the message that I'm trying to impart is, yes, they hurt you, and you are so right. It's not your fault. And now the healing, you don't have to wait for them. You don't need permission from anybody. You can begin to use simple techniques to see what's going on with me and to start to help yourself with those, so that you get just a little bit of lift to discover what your next choices become. One good step. Everything becomes possible when you take that first step and learn to re-regulate.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sitting with me. Where else should people find you? I mean, I know you're all over the place, YouTube, et cetera. Like, where do you want to direct people toward?
Well, right now, I would love for people to come check out the book. You can find it on online booksellers everywhere. I'll leave you with a link that will give you smart links to your home country, wherever you may be listening from. It's being translated right now to be published in Brazil and Poland and throughout Latin America and Spain and the Netherlands. So it's becoming widely available as we speak. But you can always find me on YouTube. And that's where most people originally find me. And then on my website, you can find all the offerings. We have a whole bunch of free tools and, guides and downloads and a free course on how to do the daily practice technique that I do. Cool. So, as well as paid courses and coaching programs and things. And my team would be happy to help you find the best thing for you. Yeah,
I'll make sure I include, all the links and stuff like that. Did you, you said you recorded the audiobook for that book yourself, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be your voice and your kind of expression throughout.
Yeah, I loved doing that. Yeah.
I've done all my audiobooks as well. And it's
cool.
It's great to be able to, make it actually you talking to the person. So I think people really like that in your book too.
I prefer books read by the author if they can possibly manage it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, cool. It's been a really great time talking to you. I appreciate it. And
nice talking to you.
Yeah. Best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this with your audience.